Bob Kaufman, who is celebrated in the main syllabus of ModPo, is such an interesting poet, and we're here to talk about. We're here on Bob Kaufman Lane. Is it Lane? Or alley? Or alley? We're here in San Francisco, sitting on some stairs on Bob Kaufman Lane with Jake and Lily, and we're going to talk about two parts of the little known, but at one point just wildly beloved Abomunist Manifesto. Obviously play on the Communist Manifesto. And this, I'm holding in my hands a very rare copy of this, which was published in City Lights in 1960. And you can see that somewhat derivative of Gregory Corso's Bomb, which was also done in a big long bomb poem. There's one called Bombs, right? But here is the manifesto itself. Abomunists join nothing but their hands or legs. So here it is. So we're going to talk about two of the pieces of this remarkable poem. And one is called the Abomunist Election Manifesto, and we're filming this during an American election season, so we thought it might be fun to talk about that. And also the Abomunist Craxioms. Jake laughs whenever he hears the word Craxioms. What is it? It's a neologism for what? Cracked axioms?
Axioms on crack?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it's a 1960 reference, but it has dollar signs next to it. And each line is axiomatic or pseudo-axiomatic. So why don't
crack up?
And you do crack up, so Craxioms. So why don't we? And of course, there's a long poetic history of poets very seriously and unironically writing axioms, sayings, adages very seriously. And this is less serious. So why don't we take turns doing one line at a time, performing Abomunist Craxioms, and I bet it's probably the first time it's ever been performed. So, Jake, you got the first line.
Egyptian mummies are lousy dancers.
Alcoholics cannot make it on root beer.
Jazz never made it back down the river.
Licking postage stamps depletes body fluids.
Fat automobiles laugh more than others and frink.
Men who die in wars become seagulls and flies.
Roaches have a rough time of it from birth.
People who read are not happy.
People who do not read are not happy.
People are not very happy.
These days, people get sicker quicker.
The sky is less crowded in the West.
Psychiatrists pretend not to know everything.
Way out people know the way out.
Laughter sounds orange at night because reality is unrealizable when it exists.
Abomunists knew it all along, but couldn't get the butterscotch down.
All right, Jake, pick one and say something about it.
Way out people know.
Oh, that's the one I
out.
wanted. That is a line. That sounds like a line that lasted into 1966 and was repeated up and down these streets here in North Beach.
And the capital, no, like no is capitalized. So it clearly.
So I know it's kind of obvious, but say what it means. Paraphrase it.
All right. So cool people who are way out, they know how to get out of the system and how to live outside of it right now.
So it's a nice poem up there. And I guess we should have done the etymology of way out and try to figure out when it became very fashionable. In my sense, it's much later that it becomes very widespread, but I'm guessing it was a beat thing in the 50s. All right, Lily, your turn. Pick a line.
Okay. I guess these days people get sicker quicker is maybe like given the reference to psychiatry later on, maybe some kind of reference to like mental illness, or especially the way that people is capitalized and sicker and quicker like rhyme together and are capitalized seems to be implying that there's some kind of like invented and trendy disease, and maybe the psychiatrists are the ones, since they're the only doctor types referenced in the poem, seems like they're the ones treating the sickness.
And also, I once heard someone say that Kaufman often capitalizes things. Sometimes whole words are randomly capitalized, because that's how he talked. Like he talked with a certain sense of urgency. You almost hear like, these days people get sicker quicker.
Yeah.
Jazz never made it back down the river. I mean, that's a really serious one, actually. San Francisco is the place where in the late 50s jazz and poetry performance conjoin, so that jazz becomes very important, and for Bob Kaufman personally, jazz is very important. But this is a reference to the history of race in America, because of course jazz has its origins in New Orleans, and when you go back down the river at a certain point, you're going into slavery. Until you get to New Orleans at a certain part when you could be a free person. So there's an irony about the origin of jazz and American race, and of course Bob Kaufman is African American. All right, Lily, your turn.
The sky is less crowded in the West. Could be like a reference, since we're talking about axioms and you think of those as like moralistic phrases to live by. It could be like a God reference or like a spirituality reference. If the sky, I mean, the literal reference being like it's not as built up at that time, now maybe more so, like the skyscrapers and stuff, I think. But also the sky's less crowded, maybe God doesn't live here as much, or like God's not as big a presence in people's lives here.
Since the bomb is so important to Kaufman.
Can I just add something on Lily's line? I think the structure here is very interesting. So the line that comes before sicker, quicker, like sicker and sky kind of go together. So the way that he lays this out, the ending of each line kind of flows interesting into the beginning of the previous one. And it's either semantic, free association, or the sound, right? So sicker and sky sound a lot alike. So that might have made
They're like paratactic pairs, you know, they sort of do pair, but they don't pair. Right. Well, I was still on that line since Bob Kaufman is really always interested in the bomb and the skies. And of course, here in San Francisco, we basically look out to the east, which of course was the site where the West experimented with the bomb, and the sky is less crowded here because we didn't explode bombs over here. Maybe that's a reference. All right, let's do one more, Jake.
Laughter sounds orange at night because reality is unrealizable while it exists.
That's the closest he comes to, you know, a surrealistic line.
Okay, so one thing. Well, obviously, like, what does that mean? Laughter sounds orange. Is it just purely a surreal image, or I mean, you know, you think about like peels of laughter, orange peels. Maybe there's a free association there that works. And reality is unrealizable while it exists. Okay, so that sort of makes sense. But then why is laughter orange? What does it mean for laughter to be orange at night? Is it the moon?
He really loves absurd comedy, and I think that's a line that gets at that. All right, before we look at the next piece, let's just say something more about Craxioms. So the high hilarity, the Dadaism of the 60s and of the New Left and of the counterculture of the Kaufman was somewhat more interested in the serious political left of the 50s, but also not ultimately a serious writer. Not ultimately a writer who would shy away from comedy, very interested in comedy as the edge of his politics. Axioms, turning axioms on their head, was a favorite rhetorical method of 60s counterculture. Do we want to say something about that? I mean, I said something that should be obvious, but actually maybe a lot of people haven't thought about that. What is it about axiomatic language that would make the counterculture want to grab hold of it and take ownership?
It's taken for granted, right? It's information, it's an axiom, so you know it's true. You're told it, you're fed it, right? So you digest it without questioning.
Examples of American axioms. You're not born in the United States, so some of these might be new to you.
Work hard, play hard.
An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Ben Franklin, I guess that is. Just the idea of Franklinian platitudes.
Early to bed, early to rise. Makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
So to turn that around to mock axiomatic language does what? Sort of asking for the obvious.
Well, it makes you, it's just something that you repeat. like you understand the meaning, and it actually has almost nothing to do with. It's like an idiom in that sense. Like it has very little to do with the actual language used. So if you switch up the language, you realize that it actually has been a pretty empty meaning this whole time because you haven't really been using words to deliver that meaning. It's just been a connotative meaning.
Yes, exactly. We can hear the newish left of poetic 1950s crying out, and the Beats did this, of course. The language of the culture is empty. We need to reinvest the language with meaning, and of course that goes back to the rise of modernism in the United States. Jake, your final thought on that before we move to the other poem?
My final thought is about the word frink. I'm always puzzled.
Yes. Fat automobiles laugh more than others, and frink.
And frink is the word that's in so many of these poems. I think the next one we'll look at has frink. The Manifesto has frink, and it's sort of like drinking for free or freaking out. It's some kind of a new thing. I just love this word frink, and then this poem is full of frink, exuding frinkage.
We studied jail poems, the series of poems in ModPo, and the Abomunist Manifesto, which was written roughly about the same time, has that same quality of declaring, of creating a kind of faux political platform, right? So Abomunist is what? Abomination? Abolition and abomination.
Bombs.
And bombs.
No, like bomb, like street bomb.
Yeah. B-O-M. His poem Bombs is B-O-M-S, so it's got all that. It's pretty clever.
Yeah.
The Abomunist Manifesto. And what did the Communist Manifesto do or say?
A lot of things.
A lot of things, like
the ghost of
generally.
This idea
Spectre, we say. Spectre.
Right, like an idea that everything, like, we're alienated from the process by which all of the capitalistic things that we have in our life are created, and we're just supposed to engage with them and not think about how they got there and not just how they physically got there, but like like culturally, why do we value them?
And it was a call
to like live communally in the sense of like not own property, not focus on just acquiring wealth and then creating class distinctions based on that.
So I've studied the 1950s in the United States, anti-communism in particular, and I'll just throw out that if in 1955 or 56, I can't remember what date, somebody at the University of Wisconsin did a study, an academic at Wisconsin did a study in Madison, Wisconsin, and asked people if they would sign certain documents like a petition, and people would not sign the Bill of Rights because they were afraid that it was a communistic thing. And of course, yes, nobody would sign anything. I remember being told by my parents, who were very sweet people in the very early 1960s, never sign anything because you never know, they could accuse you of being a communist. So to write a poem called the Abomunist Manifesto, it's at the end of the period, but it's still an audacious thing. It's declaring, yeah, I'm willing to, okay, so let's read the 10 items, speaking of Bill of Rights and speaking maybe of the 10 Commandments. Let's take turns, starting with Jake, to read the Abomunist Election Manifesto.
Abomunists vote against everyone by not voting for anyone.
The only proposition Abomunists support are those made to members of the opposite sex.
Abomunists demand the abolition of Oakland.
Abomunists demand low-cost housing for homosexuals.
Abomunists demand suppression of illegal milk traffic.
Abomunists demand statehood for North Beach.
The only office Abomunists run for is the unemployment office.
Abomunists support universal shrinkage.
Abomunists demand split-level ranch-type phone booths.
Abomunists demand the re-establishment of the government in its rightful home at...
And then there's a giant question mark. Okay, really say anything about this. Go anywhere with it, please.
Well, I think I guess the comedy comes from the absolute declaration that doesn't seem to be make sense. Like usually when quote unquote makes sense. Like usually when you're making a declarative statement that's a manifesto, it's very clear, like meant to be a rallying cry in a way that like directly conveys meaning, and most of these really don't.
He's sort of underselling himself. I demand, something that's not possible.
Abolition of
illegal milk traffic.
Right.
I love that line. Statehood for North Beach is sort of, from my view, the weakest line because it's such a North Beach kind of hip thing to say.
He's talking to his people.
He's talking to his people. Jake, your thoughts on this?
All right, so should we talk about universal shrinkage with the capital F from Amstel? Hung up on shrinkage. So
did you ever? What is frink? You don't even know. You didn't even look it up.
I don't think it's a real word. I think it's a Kaufman word. I looked it up on Urban Dictionary, and they were like
what do you
very,
think it
very.
means? Does it mean just the state of being beatitude? Being beat?
Being freaked, like in a sort of like, freaking out, but maybe in a good way. But also free drinks, like free, or drinking for free, like bombing a drink.
So the communist state of North Beach would be one where everybody gets drinks on the house, and you could split level ranch type phone booths. Is at first thought just like standard beat whining about the suburbs. On the other hand, it's suggesting, like some of us actually sleep in phone booths. It would be nice if we could have suburban phone booths. Right, so there's a certain cry for the homeless there.
Yeah, but it could also mean, just maybe like a communication thing. Maybe it's Frank O'Hara, and he said it's only a poem if I could tell it on the phone to a friend. Right, phone booth is a place of communication. Like I want to live in a state of communication.
Yeah. What about the first line, Lily? I mean, we're in election season where the whole idea of voting is fraught, I would say, for president.
The idea of people feel differently about this in the U.S., but the idea of voting means that like you personally put your endorsement behind this political figure, and like a lot of people feel pretty hard pressed to find one political figure that really shares all their values or that they really fully endorse. And so some people think you should just vote for the lesser evil. Some people think that lesser evilism is what continues the cycle of having terrible politicians. So in their view, whatever, terrible politicians. So this idea of voting against everyone by not voting for anyone, meaning like you just reject the idea of politics and you reject the
politics
idea,
as it is practiced.
Right, the idea of having political leaders.
Yeah. So a last question about this. So I think Bob Kaufman is often seen by people who are outside of circle of appreciation, and other beats are seen as nihilistic. I never think of Bob Kaufman as nihilistic, not even close. And that line that Lily just talked about is not, if you think about it, nihilistic. It's actually very idealistic. Right? Nihilism is holding your nose and voting for something. Idealism is knowing that the political structures are bankrupt, but refusal to participate is not sort of draining of meaning. So can you each comment on this whole general question about beat poetry and nihilism?
I think just because Kaufman is comic in a way that some others were comic, I don't think it's implicit of nihilism. It's romantic. It might be dismissive of the system as a whole, but I don't see the nihilism accusation just because they want to embrace everything. They want to be irreverent. Who accused them of nihilism?
Pretty much every critic of the beats in the late 50s and early 60s. The poem America by Ginsberg can be read as a nihilistic poem, but of course it's not. It's a poem that's in love with America, actually. Lily, your final thought on this question of nihilism?
If you sort of like put it the opposite way, like what would nihilism or nihilism look like? I think it would look a lot more silent and a lot more cacophonous, and like truly no meaning, or maybe it would just be like a refusal to make art. And so I think the fact that they're obsessively filling space and pages and air and improvising and like constantly creating, especially thinking about like Ginsberg and Kerouac improvising and things like that. You know, I think that you don't do that if you think the world's ending tomorrow, or if you do, it's like going to be celebratory and not categorized as like it'll be just like a big party. I don't know. Nihilism seems irrelevant to me. It's like nihilism would be just talking about, like, I don't know, it just would disappear.
Nihilo, of course, is the zero, the empty. And it should be mentioned that Bob Kaufman famously, after a while, took a vow of silence and didn't talk, as far as anybody knew, and certainly didn't write for, I think it's a dozen years. And so there is a certain amount of zero-ness and of silence in him. This little book, which is hard to come by, is called the Abomunist Manifesto. It's actually hard to come by, but not expensive. So if you have a favorite website that has relatively rare things, go and buy it for $5 or $10. It's not that expensive, but it's a lot of fun, I think. So thank you both for coming here to Bob Kaufman Lane and talking about it. We're here. It's ground zero for Kaufmanites.